These games offer an alternate story taking place in the world of Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Moon, featuring Pokemon that didn't appear in the original versions.
You heard Masuda's translator. Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon will have new Pokemon and a new story. There we go. GG. Confirmed just like that. Except there's one thing that's bothering me. If we're getting new Pokemon in Ultra Sun and Moon, why don't we have any new Pokemon news at this point? That the only new Pokemon we have are on the unfinished Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon website, and this is going to be something dealing with Solgaleo, Lunala, and Necrozma forms. So I think that that's where I'm really caught up with right now, is that if you look at the other sources and the other information of Pokemon news, as well as Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon news, there's nothing directly saying, hey, we're getting new Pokemon, but we might get new forms. Might get new variants, and I think that that's what this video is going to be looking into, because at least there's something new coming, and that's one of the biggest things that we've seen so far with all of this Ultra Sun and Moon announcement, and maybe the timeline has something to do with that. That the timeline, as we've seen with different stories, you know, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, that timeline introduced Mega Pokemon that were different, so I'm wondering if this new timeline means new Alolan forms, or just straight up new Pokemon. So, interestingly enough, if you go to the Pokemon website, and not the Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon website, there's more information. New Pokemon forms have been found appearing in the world of Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. So there's that distinction again. This timeline, the world of Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon is different from the world of Pokemon Sun and Moon, but these forms are reminiscent of the legendary Pokemon that appeared in Sun and Moon, Solgaleo, Lunala, and Necrozma. How these Pokemon related to the legendary Pokemon that appeared in Pokemon Sun and Moon. Now what gets me about this is that they're not saying new forms for Solgaleo, Lunala, and Necrozma, that they just kind of say these Pokemon are reminiscent. So it could just be dealing with something completely different right now, or it's kind of having that mystery there to keep the hype. However, in other Pokemon games, we didn't have this. For the announcement of Pokemon Black and White 2, they just said that many things have changed in the region, including some extraordinary new places and people for you to discover, plus many of the returning characters from Black version and White version take on new roles when you meet them, and then they talk about Black Kyurem and White Kyurem, and they pretty much don't leave anything to the imagination. So they say new places, new people, but they don't say new Pokemon like we saw in the trailer. They don't say new forms or reminiscent forms like we see in the Pokemon Sun and Moon update. But Black and White, they just kind of like put it a little more on the table. Now, this was back in a time where the Pokemon news cycle wasn't as crazy outside of Japan either, so maybe this is just kind of a way of updating it and kind of keeping that hype going for a bit longer instead of saying, new Pokemon game, here's the information, see you in a couple months when it's released. And then when I looked at Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, their website didn't really do much about saying new Pokemon either though, even though we got new Mega forms. So now that leaves us with the question, which one is it? Is Junichi Masuda the one that's giving us just the straight up information that there's going to be new Pokemon and that's it? Or are the new Pokemon he's referencing just the new forms of Solgaleo and Lunala that are these weird phrasing reminiscent things in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon with this alternate story? Or is it both? If we get both, that's cool too. I really don't mind at this point, because when you look at the amount of Pokemon released in the 7th generation, it honestly wasn't a lot. However, I've said this many times already, I am a fan of pretty much all of the designs in the 7th generation. I liked it. I like that they kept it condensed, that we got a few Pokemon released, which does suck and I wish there were more, but I can't really look at the overall release for 7th gen and say, man, that was underwhelming. Unlike with the 5th generation. 5th generation released 156 new Pokemon. Now, it's impossible for all of those to be a slam dunk, but then we could see that with the 5th generation and with Pokemon designs, quantity does not beat quality, and I think that that's kind of been shown throughout the generations of Pokemon, that I'm not saying that more is automatically worse, but if you can start picking out, oh, I don't like 30 Pokemon, you don't think, oh, I don't like X% of Pokemon, you just say 30 bad Pokemon generation. That's not good, even though it could be a smaller percent than other generations, quote-unquote, bad Pokemon designs or anything like that. But then we go to the Kalos region, and the Kalos region had less than half of the new Pokemon in the 5th generation. Now, there were also a lot of complaints in the 6th generation that we didn't get enough new Pokemon released, but then some people will go and point out that we did get Mega Evolutions. Now, for the entirety of the 6th generation, including Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, we ended up with 48 new Mega Pokemon, which then pushes the amount of new Pokemon introduced in the 6th generation to well over 100, and it kind of feels like it fleshes out the generation. It feels like we got more there, and if we include Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, that's just more new Megas, more forms, And that's where it also gets interesting, because Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire is both the sequel to X and Y. This has been confirmed in interviews that ORAS is actually a direct sequel to Pokemon X and Y, as well as a remake of Ruby and Sapphire version. So that means we have the sequel version introducing new Mega Pokemon, which kind of works as filler to introduce new Pokemon for that region. And then the question is Pokemon Sun and Moon, or Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon, going to be different? Because we already saw the regional variants. Regional variants, they didn't count towards the Pokedex number because these Pokemon already exist in the Pokedex and they just come up as new forms. Now, 18 added on to the 81 Pokemon introduced in the 7th generation, that feels a lot closer to the 6th generation when you think about it, because there was, what, 28, 29 Mega Pokemon introduced in X and Y, so that on top of the 72, we get close to that 100 number, and then I'm wondering if the 7th generation is going to do something similar. That this could be the opportunity that we get more Alolan forms, regional variants. That seems like the easiest one to do. You can't just be like, oh, by the way, boom, slap down another 27th generation Pokemon, but regional variants, it's very ambiguous. You guys might remember from the Pokemon Sun and Moon news, as we were learning about the new Pokemon, the new regional variants, it just seems like it's an adaptation. And that's something that's stressed inside the game as well. So what's stopping Pokemon from regions outside of the Kanto region to just coming over and then behaving differently, especially if it's a different story? I think that this is going to be our best bet, is that it's not going to be like new 7th generation Pokemon, but new forms. And I'm also wondering if, like, the new forms reminiscent of Solgaleo and Lunala, that also means that, there's going to be more new forms introduced in different ways, and the Pokemon that did not appear because of the alternate story that Junichi Masuda has hinted at, does that also just mean that we have more opportunity for regional variants as well? And I do think that when it comes to the number of 7th generation Pokemon introduced, we feel a little gypped because of the Ultra Beasts and the Legendaries, that we had a quad Legendary stack instead of a trio. We also had 7 Ultra Beasts introduced, so it's like, oh, where's our 7 Pokemon? Where's our 7th-gen Pokemon? Not these weird Ultra Beast things, an extra Legendary, and then a couple of other Legendaries, because Solgaleo and Lunala had pre-evolutions with Cosmog and Cosmoem. So I feel that, like, the inside of the Pokedex kind of cut off a little too soon, and maybe that's why people think we didn't get a lot of Pokemon, even though when you look at the whole expanse, yeah, we're pretty much on average with what we've seen, around 100, including forms and all the new weirdness that's going on. And then Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, well, we already know there's at least 2 new Pokemon. If we're just counting forms as Pokemon in this regard, that's gonna be alright. So I think that comes close to the 4th generation, that the 4th generation had a lot of existing Pokemon get evolutions, and then that helped pad out the Pokedex. Now these Pokemon actually counted towards the Pokedex number, unlike Megas and the form changes, and I think that that could be where the difference is. I honestly thought that the 4th generation had one of the strongest Pokedexes introduced. So I feel that once you go deeper and look at everything surrounding the Pokedex, I don't really think that these 6th or 7th generations were weak, but I want to see more. And that might be where the percentage game comes into play, because when you're in the 4th generation, when you're in the 3rd generation, and you're getting 100 new Pokemon, that's a massive expansion to the roster percentage-wise. But now that we're at over 800 Pokemon, I think like a steady stream of forms or different Pokemon, as a game comes out, we get a little bit of an update, is kind of going to work out better. I think we've kind of been spoiled by that a little with Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire and X and Y. It's like, oh, X and Y didn't get a lot of Pokedex, but we got Mega forms. Then we got more Megas, then we got Z Crystals, then we got Alolan forms, now we have more forms coming, so I'm actually okay with that. I'm actually okay with just getting cool Pokemon, cool designs that keep kind of getting slowly introduced with Pokemon now, since we're getting close to approaching 1,000 Pokemon. If the next generation just goes and slams out another 100 or 200, it's going to get kind of crazy pretty quick, but I'd like to just see this steady stream come in, and maybe that's what the new Pokemon games are going for. Also, Pokemon game confirmed on the Switch. Who knows what we're going to see with maybe Diamond Pearl remakes, 8th generation, or anything like that, but I definitely want to see more evolutions of existing Pokemon, and I don't think you need an entirely new generation of doing that. I guess Diamond Pearl remakes would be the best way of doing it, as a callback to what happened in the 4th generation. And I think that's kind of it. Just kind of like looking at the history and talking about it, taking the news that we have and kind of forming an idea about it, but I'm really convinced right now that we're either getting some kind of ultra forms. I still stick by my video. I don't understand how people were calling it clickbait, because there is something different about that Lycanroc. They also said the picture of Lycanroc I used was dishonest, even though it's the exact same picture that we see inside of the trailer. But that's kind of one of the things that gets me. I was looking at this Ultra Lycanroc, I broke it down for minutes, even though it's just a quick little thing. But going off the rest of the information, we have new Pokemon, new forms, alternate story, and then we have forms reminiscent of other Pokemon, and it's Ultra. I think the whole idea of Ultra should be big here, because we have Ultra Beast, we have the Ultra Dimension, we have an Ultra version of the next game in a different storyline, and what other way of adding new forms, new Pokemon, than with Ultra Forms or Ultra Power? Sure, it's really close to Mega Evolution and stuff like that, but I think that there's still some room here, especially for the lesser used Pokemon. Pretty much my ideas that I already talked about in the Ultra Lycanroc video are the things I can just kind of keep saying here, but I think that there's a little bit of promise right there. That's not just Solgaleo Lunala forms, boom, done, there you go, boom, Ultra Sun and Moon, give us $40. I think there has to be much more expanse going on. I think the deeper people look into what Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon could have, the more opportunity there is for this to be a crazy game with an insane amount of features. And then also I do want to go back to other Alolan forms. I feel that if we have Alolan forms for other Pokemon from other generations, that's going to be a lot more fair as well, because why do we just have first and third generation Mega forms? Where's second? Where's fourth? Where are all these? I mean, if you look down the future, okay, Diamond and Pearl can maybe do something with the 4th generation, but what about the 3rd generation? You can actually catch the 2nd generation starters as well as the 5th generation starters inside of the region already. They're not native. That island scan should have something to do with their form, so I'm really feeling that if we get like 2nd generation starter Alolan Pokemon, as well as other Alolan forms as well, then when you look at the 2nd generation compared to the 1st, I feel like 2nd gen has a lot more viable candidates for something that would want to be in the Alola region and get a form change, like Sunflora. Sunflora definitely needs something crazy going on for it. Dunsparce has always needed some love. The starters, I mean Blossom, it just got Quiver Dance, so if it gets a form with better stats and then goes into the Quiver Dance, that could also be pretty crazy. Delabird's already on the island. How? Okay, that's what I want to know. That's what I want to know. How can you drop off a penguin in Hawaii and then have it stay the same if you're dealing with regional variants and we're talking about the crazy world of Pokemon with evolution and form changes? Nah, we need Surfer Dude Penguin, and that is going to be like the coolest thing ever. So I mean, you could see hints that there should be other Pokemon that gain regional variant status inside of the Alola region. I think that could be the biggest part of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. That maybe Ultra is both an enhancer as well as a little bit of a distraction, that yes, some Pokemon are going to get the Ultra side of things because they're affected by the Ultra Dimension, and then, hey, we have these regional variants that don't really add to the Pokedex count, so we can just go and modify other Pokedex counts, and then done. Like, that's kind of the thing, like, you don't feel overwhelmed by the introduction of Alolan Pokemon because it doesn't add towards the big stat. Now, it does make the generation look underwhelming. Once you dig into it, yeah, just give us like 20 Pokemon that are regional variants of 2nd and 4th generation or something. That could be pretty cool. You know, I think we kind of saw a little bit of that in the 6th generation as well. Kind of like with Mega Blaziken. Hey, Mega Blaziken, where are your buddies? Why do we not have a Mega Sceptile or Mega Swampert? You know what time it is? It's time that we get a 3rd generation remake as well. So if there's like a regional variant for the 4th generation, that's going to get people a little bit more excited about Diamond Pearl remakes as well, and then also just being a benefit to Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, much like some of the little teasers that we had inside of X and Y were also a benefit as well. So if you guys enjoyed the video, it's still unclear at this time, which is upsetting, but hey, we got Pokemon news coming up in hopefully 2 weeks as we get more Korokoro, more official announcements. We only got the announcement in June. It turned out to be a dry month, but other than that, just goes up from here, I'm guessing. So if you guys enjoy the video, hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.
New features will allow you to enjoy your adventure even more, making this truly an Ultra title.